There's something incredibly powerful about a person who doesn't flinch when someone tries to throw them off balance. When your partner says something that stings, that catches you off guard, or feels like a jab meant to push your buttons, your first instinct might be to react. Maybe you feel the urge to raise your voice, shut down, or fire back with something equally cutting. That's normal, but here's where your real strength begins to shine: when you pause, breathe, and respond with poise instead. When you show that you can hold space for your emotions without becoming a slave to them, you confuse the very rhythm of the conflict. You disarm the tension not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by not giving them the reaction they expected. Calm mystery isn't about being silent or cold, it's about being composed and intentional. When you don't immediately retaliate or crumble, the person in front of you is left wondering what you're really thinking, how deeply their words affected you, and why you seem so centered. They may even start questioning their own behavior because you haven't played the usual role in the emotional dance. It throws them off in the best way, not because you're playing games, but because you're grounded in your value. They expected drama, maybe even a breakdown. What they got instead was presence, and that's far more unsettling to someone who's used to emotional chaos. You become less predictable, and in that unpredictability, you become unforgettable. Most people live in reactive mode. It's easier to yell, to guilt trip, or to cry in hopes that someone will change. But the moment you step into a higher level of communication where your response comes from clarity instead of pain, you shift the energy entirely. That doesn't mean you're suppressing how you feel. It means you're choosing not to give your power away in the heat of the moment. When you reply calmly, when you ask a thoughtful question instead of making an accusation, it stuns the person who just hurt you. It makes them sit up straighter, lean in, and start realizing they're dealing with someone who won't be emotionally manipulated, and that's where the true dynamic starts to change. Think about the last time someone said something that made you feel small. You probably remember how fast your chest tightened, how the words flew to your tongue before you even thought them through. But imagine instead that you simply paused. You looked them in the eye, and you let there be a few seconds of silence. In that silence, so much is communicated confidence, control, and self-worth. Then, instead of reacting with heat, you respond with something grounded like, "What made you say that?" or "That didn't feel fair." That moment alone changes the entire mood. They were expecting a storm. You gave them stillness, and in doing so, you reminded them they don't have access to your peace unless they know how to treat it. When you operate from calm mystery, you're not avoiding the truth, you're commanding it. You create a safe distance between what someone does and how you choose to engage with it. It tells your partner that while their words or actions may have landed, they don't get to determine the tone of your inner world. You hold the frame, and that's deeply attractive because it shows maturity. You're not trying to win an argument. You're trying to understand what just happened, why it happened, and whether it aligns with what you want in a relationship. That's the difference between emotional impulsiveness and emotional intelligence. One tries to prove a point, the other tries to protect peace. There's nothing passive about this approach. It takes far more strength to stay centered than it does to lash out. And what makes it powerful is that it leaves space for truth to surface. When your partner doesn't get the rise they expected, they're left to sit with their own words. Sometimes that's what they need to actually hear themselves, to realize the weight of what they said or did. And if they care about you, that quiet space becomes a mirror. You didn't need to yell to make your point. You didn't need to fall apart to be seen. You simply stood your ground with quiet confidence, and that alone can create a deeper shift than any emotional outburst ever could. What makes you magnetic in that moment isn't that you're playing hard to get, it's that you're playing by different rules entirely. You're not in the business of chasing emotional justice in the moment. You're in the business of protecting your energy, your integrity, and your standards. And when someone realizes that their words or actions didn't have the power to unravel you, that's when they start paying closer attention. Not because you're manipulating them, but because you've shown a level of self-respect that demands a higher level of engagement. You've just shifted the terms of the conversation without even raising your voice. What this does long-term is create a new dynamic in your relationship, one where respect becomes non-negotiable. You've set a tone that says, "I don't match your chaos. I invite you to meet me in clarity." And the beauty is, once you start showing up this way, you start attracting a different kind of behavior from your partner. They know that they can't just push your buttons and expect you to collapse into confusion or conflict. They have to think before they speak, reflect before they act. because you've raised the bar not through threats or ultimatums, but through the way you show up in difficult moments. The best part is, this kind of response isn't about being perfect or emotionless. It's about recognizing your choices. Every time someone hurts you, you're at a crossroads. Will you give them control over how you feel, or will you choose a response that reflects your highest self? That pause, that moment of breath before you speak, is where your entire power lies. You don't need to perform strength. You simply need to remember it. The calmer you are in the face of emotional turbulence, the more control you have over your life and your relationships. That's not confusing in the chaotic sense, it's confusing in the compelling sense. Your partner may not even be fully aware of the impact of what they've done, but when they see you respond with grace and depth instead of drama and volatility, they start to realize they're not just dealing with someone they can hurt and win back with apologies. They're dealing with someone who sees everything and still chooses how to engage from a place of wisdom. That unpredictability, the kind rooted in maturity, not games, creates an energy shift. It's like emotional judo. You don't push back harder, you redirect the energy, and suddenly the weight of the moment lands where it belongs. There's something undeniably attractive about someone who refuses to lose themselves just to keep someone else. When your partner hurts you, whether intentionally or carelessly, there's a split-second decision you face. Do I shrink myself to keep this connection alive, or do I hold my boundaries, even if it means shaking things up? Self-respect doesn't come from being agreeable, quiet, or endlessly forgiving. It comes from standing tall in the face of pain and still choosing not to betray your values. You can acknowledge your hurt, honor your emotions, and still carry yourself with dignity. When you do, you show the other person that love doesn't mean abandoning who you are. In moments of conflict, many people go into over-explaining mode. They try to justify why they feel hurt, why it mattered, and why the other person should care. That's where self-sacrifice often begins. You start molding yourself to protect the relationship instead of letting the relationship rise to meet the best version of you. When someone crosses a line, the instinct to please or fix things can be strong, especially if you fear loss. But there's power in resisting that urge. There's clarity in showing up fully and calmly, saying, "This matters to me," and leaving space for them to decide how they want to respond. What separates self-respect from self-sacrifice is not how loudly you speak, but how deeply you believe in your own worth. You don't need to prove that you're lovable, valuable, or worthy of kindness. That's a baseline. When someone hurts you and you immediately move into convincing them to understand or love you again, you're giving them the keys to your confidence. True connection isn't built on you constantly explaining your value, it's built on both people recognizing it. When you stop performing worthiness and start embodying it, your presence alone becomes a boundary. And anyone who genuinely cares will feel that shift. It's easy to fall into patterns where love becomes performance. You think, if I stay calm, they'll stay. If I apologize, they'll soften. If I ignore my needs, they won't leave. But that isn't love, it's survival dressed in romance. The truth is, anyone who makes you feel like you have to keep proving your value is already missing the point. You don't show strength by tolerating poor treatment. You show strength by communicating what matters to you and being willing to walk away from anything that doesn't align. That choice isn't bitter, it's brave. It says, I want connection, but not at the cost of self-abandonment. Self-respect means you don't trade your peace for temporary comfort. When your partner does something that hurts you, the easy road is to downplay it just to restore harmony. But peace built on suppression is fragile. It cracks under pressure and eventually erupts. Respecting yourself means being honest, even when it risks discomfort. You're not looking to punish or shame. You're simply saying, this is what I need to feel safe, seen, and supported. That kind of honesty requires courage because it doesn't guarantee approval. But it does guarantee alignment with your truth, and that's where real security comes from. Some people confuse sacrifice with love. They think the more you give up, the deeper the connection becomes. But the love that demands your silence, your tolerance of pain, or your disregard for your own boundaries isn't healthy, it's transactional. When someone crosses a line and you respond with quiet resignation, it teaches them how to treat you. Not because you're weak, but because you're training them to believe you'll always absorb the blow. Self-respect flips that script. It teaches them that while you have compassion, you also have limits. And those limits aren't barriers, they're invitations for a deeper, more conscious form of love. The most magnetic people are the ones who don't need to be chased or rescued. They're the ones who know who they are and what they bring, and they don't abandon themselves to maintain closeness. When you're hurt, the way you respond shows your blueprint for intimacy. Do you lean into people pleasing, hoping they'll validate your pain? Or do you anchor into your truth and allow their response to reveal their capacity to hold you? Self-respect says, I'm not here to manipulate your behavior. I'm here to show up fully, and from that place, see who's really willing to meet me. What this looks like in practice is subtle but powerful. It's saying, that didn't sit well with me, without wrapping it in 5 layers of justification. It's giving yourself permission to step back when the energy no longer feels respectful. It's resisting the urge to fix their discomfort when you express a need. And it's choosing to let some moments go, not because you're afraid of conflict, but because you're prioritizing your peace over your ego. Self-respect isn't a performance. It's a quiet standard you live by, even when no one's clapping. There will be moments when choosing yourself feels like rejection. Your nervous system might scream for connection, for repair, for resolution. But what you're really doing is rewiring your definition of love. You're no longer subscribing to the belief that being loved means being chosen by someone else at the expense of your own emotional safety. You're creating a new model where love begins with self-honor, and from that place, you only invite relationships that reflect that same energy. It's not about being hard to love. It's about being unwilling to accept a version of love that doesn't love you back in a healthy way. This doesn't mean you become rigid or overly guarded. It means your openness is rooted in discernment. You're still capable of softness, still open to growth, but you're not available for dynamics that drain you. That boundary doesn't need to be explained over and over. It's something that becomes evident in how you carry yourself. The person who hurt you will notice. They'll see that you didn't come running with excuses or compromises. You didn't trade your standards for the hope of a quick emotional patch. Instead, you created space for accountability, for healing, and for a deeper respect to emerge. You're not punishing them by standing in your worth. You're giving them the opportunity to rise to the occasion. Some will, some won't. But your self-respect means you're no longer building your life around someone else's willingness to treat you well. You're building it around your own commitment to treat yourself well. And when you do that, your presence becomes a filter. You stop having to explain what you will or won't tolerate. People just feel it. And those who value you will show it, not just in words, but in how they choose to show up when it really counts. There's an unexpected strength in meeting hurt with grace. When your partner says or does something that wounds you, the natural urge might be to shut down, turn away, or build walls around your heart. But what if, instead of going cold, you stayed warm, not because you're excusing the behavior, but because you refuse to let someone else's actions pull you out of alignment with who you are? Kindness in that moment becomes an act of power, not passivity. It's not about pretending everything is okay. It's about choosing how you want to show up even when things aren't. And that choice holds a weight many people aren't ready for. Coldness can feel like control, but often it's just another version of self-protection. It creates distance, but it rarely brings clarity. Kindness, on the other hand, makes people pay attention. It catches them off guard. They're expecting silence, attitude, or withdrawal. What they find instead is someone who, despite being hurt, still speaks with honesty and warmth. That doesn't mean you're smiling through disrespect or being overly accommodating. It means you're rooted in emotional maturity. You express your truth without venom, your hurt without blame, and your boundaries without shutting the door completely. That's a different kind of confidence, the kind that makes people want to step up, not back away. Think about the energy it takes to stay cold towards someone. It's exhausting. You're constantly managing the performance of distance, guarding your tone, controlling your face, measuring every response. But kindness is effortless when it's real. When you're connected to your values, it becomes natural to say, I didn't like the way that made me feel, with sincerity rather than sting. Kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you steady. It says, even when I'm hurt, I still choose respect. And that creates a space where real accountability can exist, not because you demanded it, but because you made it safe enough for someone to reflect. Kindness creates reflection. Coldness often creates defensiveness. When someone feels attacked, they're less likely to own what they did. But when you approach them with calm and care, they drop their armor. They hear you, not just your words. And in that space, something unexpected can happen. They begin to feel the weight of their actions without you having to push it onto them. It becomes theirs to carry, and that is far more effective than forcing an apology. You've held them accountable without escalating the situation. You've stayed in your power without closing your heart. That balance is rare and deeply disarming. It's not about being nice to win someone over. It's about choosing kindness as a reflection of your own inner peace. You don't raise your voice just to be heard. You don't need to punish to feel powerful. You speak clearly and gently because you know your worth doesn't need to be shouted. And what's incredible is how people respond to that. Suddenly, they feel the contrast. They remember the weight of their words, not because you reminded them with anger, but because you reminded them with grace. That's the kind of moment that lingers. It leaves an impression that's hard to ignore. Many people expect emotional chaos when they hurt someone. They're prepared for accusations, slammed doors, or cold silences. What they're not prepared for is a calm voice that says, "That didn't sit right with me, but I'm still here, still speaking to you with love." That's what stops them in their tracks. That's what makes them pause and ask themselves, why did I hurt someone who's showing me this much grace? It triggers a deeper level of introspection, not guilt-driven, but awareness-driven. And that shift can only happen when you respond with warmth instead of walls. Kindness doesn't mean you don't feel hurt. It means you don't hand your pain the microphone. You speak from healing, not from the wound. That's not always easy. It takes discipline. It takes pausing when you want to react. It takes reconnecting with your higher self in a moment where your ego wants to lead. But when you do that, you not only protect your peace, you elevate the entire interaction. You show your partner that conflict doesn't have to look like war. It can look like understanding. It can look like two people learning how to love each other better through difficult conversations. This kind of response doesn't just teach them about you, it teaches them about themselves. It shows them a different way to navigate conflict, one they may never have experienced before. And once someone feels that kind of energy, it's hard to go back to anything less. Kindness becomes a mirror. It shows them how their behavior looks without you needing to exaggerate or dramatize it. Your composure becomes the contrast to their chaos, and that's what sparks change, not pressure, but presence. You didn't lose control. You didn't lash out. You just stayed connected to who you are. It's also important to remember that kindness has boundaries. You're not being kind to be walked over. You're being kind because that's the standard you hold for yourself. And in doing so, you make it clear, I won't attack you, but I also won't ignore this. That subtle yet powerful stance is where transformation happens. You're not closing your heart, you're opening a door for growth. But whether the other person chooses to walk through it is up to them. You've done your part. You've shown that being hurt doesn't give you permission to become someone you're not. You get to hold people accountable and still choose compassion. You get to express your feelings and still remain composed. You get to be affected without being reactive. This is the emotional discipline that turns relationships into deeper connections. Because over time, your partner begins to trust that you're not going to explode or shut down. They begin to feel safe owning their mistakes because they know they won't be met with cruelty. That safety creates intimacy. That space builds respect. And kindness, not coldness, becomes the foundation of how you both grow together. There's something incredibly powerful about not giving someone full access to your emotional world the moment they've hurt you. You are allowed to take a beat, to pause, to breathe before you react. When someone expects you to break down, to lash out, or to beg for understanding, your restraint becomes the most unexpected response of all. Not because you're playing games, but because you've learned to master the space between stimulus and response. That quiet, thoughtful pause can speak louder than any outburst. It's not silence rooted in fear, it's presence rooted in strength. You don't owe your full reaction to someone who hasn't yet earned your vulnerability again. That's not being cold or manipulative, it's being emotionally intelligent. There is grace in keeping part of your inner world protected while you observe the energy being brought to you. When someone's actions create pain, you don't have to immediately perform that pain for them to see it's real. You can let it simmer, sit with it, and decide how much of it deserves to be seen. This kind of self-control shows maturity, but it also builds curiosity. It makes the other person lean in and wonder what's really going on beneath your calm exterior. Being mysterious in your emotional response doesn't mean being distant or dishonest. It means you no longer hand over your entire emotional landscape in the heat of the moment. You don't rush to define the experience or lay it all bare in hopes of a quick repair. Instead, you stay composed, observing not just them, but yourself. What are you really feeling? What do you actually need? That moment of mystery, that deliberate pause, allows you to reconnect with yourself before turning outward. And that reconnection is what prevents emotional spirals and unnecessary regret. This approach keeps your power intact. It shows the other person that while you are capable of depth, You are not emotionally exposed to anyone who hasn't proven they can handle your heart with care. People often expect dramatic reactions when they hurt you. They expect to see the damage play out in front of them. But when you don't give them the performance, it forces them to look inward. They can't escape into your reaction. They have to sit with their own behavior. Your calm becomes a mirror, and what they see in that mirror is often far more revealing than anything you could have said. Mystery is not about being unapproachable. It's about protecting the sacred space between what happened and how you choose to interpret it. You don't always have to rush to define what this means for the relationship. You don't have to collapse into a long explanation of your disappointment. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let your silence carry the weight of what was done. Let your pause communicate, I'm processing this and I'm not ready to respond yet. That is not indifference, that is discipline. And discipline in moments of emotional turbulence is a rare form of self-respect.